Hello, in this video I'm going to show you how I exported a Gcode file from Easel and modified that file so I was able to run it on my CNC router, which uses a RAMPS 1.4 control board and the Marlin firmware. As you may know, Easel is intended to work with the Grbl board, and I believe Grbl is also the firmware, but it is possible to run the Gcode or modify the Gcode that you export from Easel to run on pretty much any CNC machine. Now the instructions I'm going to give are specifically for Marlin, but I'm going to try to make the instructions as general as possible, so potentially you'll be able to get the Gcode to work regardless of what sort of control board you're using, even if it's just a plain Gcode interpreter. The reason I had to come up with this hack is because I'm used to using my CNC router to cut plates of material, sides of boxes, kind of mechanical parts out of sheet material. This is the first time I've actually wanted to engrave a design with large flat-bottomed engraved areas within the workpiece. And as far as I could tell, Easel was the best tool to do that. So I'm going to easel.inventables.com. I'm going to start a new project. Before I import anything, I'm just going to set my bit size. For this project I'm using a 0.8mm engraving bit. I'm just going to check my units down here are set to millimeters. If you're in America, you're probably going to want to use inches, but I wouldn't know about that. I'm going to go to import image trace because I'm going to engrave an image I produced for a project which this video is kind of part of. I'm going to invert it because I want all the white areas to be recessed into the piece of wood that I'm engraving into. I'm just going to adjust my smoothing to how I want it and import it. Now obviously you can kind of change the engraving depth, change the size of the shape, etc. So I scaled the shape to the size that I want to engrave. This is where on a Grbl based machine such as the x-carve you could probably just click carve. But I need to download the Gcode, so I'm going to go to Machine, Advanced, and click Generate Gcode. And now I can click Export Gcode, and it's downloaded there. I'm going to open up that file, and I'm going to open that in Editor. To edit Gcode, I prefer using Editor on the Mac, but you can use any plain text editor, such as on Windows I would just use Notepad. Also open in my plain text editor, I have a file which I generated using a plugin that I wrote myself actually from SketchUp, but essentially what you want to do is find a file which you know will run on your CNC machine already. So this could be a Gcode file that was generated by LazyCam, cam.py, SketchUcam. If you are new to using Easel, this would be a file that you generated using your preferred Gcode generator that you've been using up until now. So now I've got both of these files open. This is the file from Easel. This is the file from my preferred Gcode generator. I'm going to identify what I would refer to as the header and footer of each file, and those are usually the Gcode lines before the first movement command. Movement commands always start with G0, G1, G2, G3. So in this file, the first movement command is this G0Z. And if I go down to the bottom, the last movement command is pretty much the same thing, G0Z. And then this is the position that Z would move to. You'll probably find that with in Gcode files which control CNC routers, it will usually be the Z command first. And then in the file from Easel, there's the first movement command. It's G1Z. And if I go down to the bottom of the file from Easel, the last movement command is G1Z. So in this file, I would pretty much call that part the header, because this is information that the CNC machine needs, which tells it how to interpret the rest of the file. And then at the end, the footer, it just tells the machine to go back to home and then turn the machine off with the M2 command. In the file from Easel, the header is just these two lines here. If I go down to the bottom, this is slightly different. There's a G21, G90 at the end, and I would say that's kind of the footer as well. So once you've identified the header and footer of each file, copy the header from the non-Easel file, highlight the header in the Easel file, just delete that and paste in the one from the file that you know works on your CNC router. Go back to the non-Easel Gcode and copy the footer. Go to the bottom of your Easel Gcode, delete everything after that last Z command and paste in your new footer. However, I would say that these commands are probably part of the footer of the Easel file too, so I'm going to delete those. So the next step, I'm going to look again at my non-Easel Gcode file. I've noticed here that there are no feed rate commands in this file. Feed rate commands are always on the end of a movement Gcode line, and they start with F. So the Easel uses feed rate commands. However, this file, which I know will run on my CNC router, doesn't have feed rate commands. So by looking at this file, I can tell that my CNC router doesn't want to see those feed rate commands. So I'm going to have to remove them from the Easel file. If the file that you know will run on your CNC router does have feed rate commands, you could obviously leave these in, but because mine doesn't, I'm going to have to delete them. So I'm going to use my plain text editor's find and replace feature to do that. What I've done is highlighted that first one. I'm going to edit, find, replace. So on the find box, it has a copy of F228.6. I'm going to replace it with nothing. So when I hit replace all, that's going to remove all occurrences of that from the file. I'm going to highlight F762.0. This would obviously be slightly different F command in your Gcode, but I'm now going to replace F762.0 with nothing again. Now I've noticed that Easel tends to only have two unique feed rates within the entire file. I'm just going to check down, and I can see that find and replace those two values has removed the feed rate commands from the entire file. Now the next step, I'm going to find out if the non-Easel file, which I know will run on my CNC router, contains negative Z commands. It's kind of a short file, so I can kind of see that it doesn't, but just to make sure, I'm going to search for Z negative. I'm just searching for all different combinations of spaces with Z negative, and it hasn't found any. And specifically, I know that Marlin, my firmware, will not accept negative Z commands. However, Easel treats the surface of the material that you're cutting into as Z0, and negative Z commands represent the depth of the engraving. The difficulty here is if you're engraving a shape which has more than one different depth of engraving in it, this is where this step won't work, and you're going to find it very difficult to run Easel Gcode. But because I'm doing essentially a flat engraving, what I can do is search for all the negative Z values, do a find replace for that particular. Now the cut depth that I set was 0.2 of a millimeter, so I know that by replacing Z minus 0.2 with 0, I'm going to get rid of all the negative Z values in this file. I'm going to click replace all, so that's now Z0. The G92 command now will control the cut depth. So I'm going to set, and this will work specifically for Marlin, I'm going to set G92 X0 Y0 Z 0.2. So now the travel height when the bit is withdrawn from the material is this value, 3.8. That was just the safe travel height that was set when I exported this from Easel. The travel height above the material is Z 3.8 minus 0.2, so that's about 3.6 millimeters. I think that's probably a bit high, so I can just do another find replace on there. So if I replace that with 1.7, 1.7 minus 0.2 is 1.5, so that means that the bit will be 1.5 millimeters above the surface of the material while the machine's moving around between cuts. Okay, so now I'm going to save that, and I find that Marlin works well with print run prontoface. This is my normal method of sending Gcode to my machine. So I'm going to load up that saved. So now I've loaded the modified Easel file, and I can tell already from the preview that that's loaded correctly and that that will run on my CNC router. So I think Easel is a really useful tool, and I hope this video made it a little bit more accessible to people without a Grbl board or an x-carve machine. But I think that video was pretty dry. I do upload some interesting videos, such as this video about how I made a replica of the puzzle box from the Hellraiser films. I build a lot of stuff around the Arduino microcontroller. I generally kind of make things, patch things up. If you're interested in seeing more of that, please do subscribe.